Has anyone been to the redwood forest in California? Do you know what the secret of the redwood forest is? There's a mentor of mine who was visiting the redwood forest, and there was a tour guide that was speaking to a group of people, and as they were walking by, he said, let's listen in here and see what he has to say. And he says, listen carefully. I'm going to tell you the secret of the redwood forest. So the redwood forest, of course, you know, these trees are, some of them thousands of years old, and they're huge, and it's an amazing experience when you go to the redwood forest. I mean, you really feel like you're in the land of the giants. You know, like there was this old television show called The Land of the Giants, and you know, it's kind of mystical. Like you just feel like, wow, I'm literally in the land of the giants. So, an amazing thing about the redwoods is that their root system is not very deep. They only go down about 6 to 13 feet. And considering the size of those trees, but what they do is they expand horizontally, and they network, they connect with the other trees, and they even sort of fuse with the roots of the other trees. So it's a very extensive labyrinth. It's like a mat of support. And you know, that part of California, they have some pretty heavy storms. And you know, considering the size of those trees, you can imagine the force of, you know, the storm. So it's an interesting understanding of how when the storms of life come upon us, what is really going to support us? It's that connection with others, you know, and that really is sort of like foundational to any, what I'll call the perennial tradition. That there's a universal truth, a universal virtue that's spoken of throughout history in different traditions, different wisdom traditions, religious traditions. And if we can sort of open our heart a little bit, open our mind a little bit, and understand that, you know, there's this principle of nurture and nature, where we have some, literally our DNA is inherited from our parents and even prior generations. You know, like they talk about generational trauma, you know, that's carried through. So literally our DNA, but also the environment that we grow up in. You know, it's obviously one of the first things when you're having difficulties. You know, if you go to a therapist, so the first thing is like, well, let's talk about your family. Like, what was your family situation like? And so I'm a little fascinated by sociology and history. I'm not a historian, I'm not a sociologist, but it just really piques my curiosity. And I try to see how it impacts me individually, but also why, especially religious communities, why they behave the way they do, you know. And what I've been thinking about a lot lately is the integration between Western and Eastern cultures. You know, and now with the world, you know, the global village, so to speak, the internet, you know, the lines are becoming blurred, but really Western culture, Western civilization is rooted in Greece and Rome thinking, the philosophical thinking of those great, you know, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and then the Renaissance, the Enlightenment period, and then, you know, we have that European heritage, you know, coming to America. So we've inherited a certain cultural perspective, or I don't want to say bias per se, but we do have a particular lens that we've grown up with in Western culture. And it's been great in many ways, just with the the expansion of the technology, the science and reason, and that's one of the hallmarks of Western civilization. It's steeped in rational thinking, and science and breaking things down, analyzing, separate things, separating things into their parts, and trying to understand how things work. And along with that's come a certain amount of like motivation to sort of kind of conquer nature. Like we are going to, with science and technology, and then we've had the whole colonization from Europe with the American, South American, well, not the whole world, the British Empire. I mean, there was a time when they say the British the sun never set on the British Empire, and that was not even that long ago. It was only about a century ago when they were the world dominating empire. I can't remember. I had numbers on it once, and it was like astounding, like the influence that the British Empire had. So right now, I was reading. There's a it's an international think tank. I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was talking about America post World War II. We have unprecedented prosperity, in America, and America wasn't a superpower prior to World War II, but we've become, I would say, conditioned, like, this is our normal. We are the greatest country in the planet, I mean, currently the empire of America is still, and with the fall of the Soviet Union, which was the big, competitor, the Cold War and all that. So America has, kind of come to this peak, and there's no denying it. So many people wanting to come to America, big issue now, of course, with immigration. So we do have a certain, like, kind of perspective that's rooted in we are a part of a very unique time in history, but what's happening now currently with and I'm not going to bring up politics, but I'm just going to say everyone is talking again and again about the polarization, like this, I'll call it shrunken consciousness, that it's very much, and this is a part of the characteristics of Western civilization, that there's more of a focus on individuality, individual rights, and so on. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. I mean, equality, freedom, individual rights. In contrast to Eastern cultures, they tend to emphasize more a holistic view. Things are more in terms of relationship, as opposed to individuals. And these are generalization. It's not, black and white. It's just, these are generalization. So, but like in medicine, like Eastern medicine there's very much like a connection between the mind and the body. Like they don't treat just the physical. Like allopathic medicine, Western medicine tends to focus more on the physical body and not as much the mind, although it's changing. There's a lot of Western allopathic doctors that are recognizing the importance of our emotional condition and our mental health on our physical health. So again, these are not hard and fast things. They're just, but we do have this nurture and nature thing, that we have grown up in a culture that does tend to focus more on the individual. And how is that playing out? Our founder, Prabhupada, this is, it's not a dirty word to say, to be self-interested. I mean, we do have to take care of ourselves, in order to, it's a big problem with, you work in caregiving, don't you, with the assisted living life? There's a thing called caregiver burnout, where you give so much of yourself to others that you actually hurt your own health. And then there's an expression, a paramedic, the first thing a paramedic, when they arrive on an accident scene, is to secure the scene, because a dead paramedic can't save anybody, you know. So we do, or like when you get on an airplane, they always say, you know, if the pressure drops and the mask comes, put on your mask first, because you can't help, you know, anybody else if you die. So there is a certain, you know, wisdom, and yes, we have to take care of ourselves. But Prabhupada, our founder, he said there's a phenomenon where we can extend that sort of self-focus on our immediate connections, our family, or well, let's put it this way, our own physical existence, our bodies, you know, and the extensions of our body, our families. And where was my body born? I'm an American. I was born in America. You know, are these really substantial self-identities? Because they're transient. You know, we come into this world with nothing, and we leave this world with nothing. There's a joke: you never see a hearse with a U-Haul trailer behind it. You know, so now these it's not like, oh wow, such profound thinking. No, these questions have been for millennia. Civilizations have struggled with trying to understand not just how the world works, but why. And in one sense, that's the more important question: why? You know, why? Why am I here? Is there a reason? Is there a purpose? And in any system of logic or reason, you have to start with axiomatic truths. They're self-evident truths. You can't build any logical thinking process if you don't start with an axiomatic truth. Just like there's a principle of causality. For every effect, there's a cause. Something just doesn't happen without, you know, things just don't happen without a cause. You know, it's an axiomatic truth. Or in mathematics, you see, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. It's an axiomatic truth. It's self-evident, and then you build on that. So otherwise you run into a problem, what's called infinite regress. If we say water boils at 112 degrees, what is it, 112?
212.
212.
Fahrenheit.
Okay. So we say water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So you could accept that and build, you know, a reasoning from that. But you could say, well, how do I know if water really boils at 212? Because your measurements may not be accurate. The instruments that you're using may not be accurate. You know, the mercury in the thermometer could be contaminated with something, you know. In other words, there's an infinite regress. You can keep going backwards. How do we know anything is true? You know, it's like it never ends. You can just say, well, how do I know the mercury's, you know, not contaminated? Then how do I know it's just, you'll never get anywhere if you don't start. There has to be some self-evident truth. And Thomas Jefferson, in the Declaration, he was the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. He wasn't the only, but he was the primary author. He said that we hold that these truths are self-evident, that all men are created equal. Now, on what level are we all equal? Because materially speaking, some people are stronger than others. Some people are more gifted in athletics than others. We wouldn't have Olympic gold medalists if everybody was equal on that level. There's different levels of intelligence. There's different levels of, you know, and any kind of metric you can look at. So what does it mean that when we hold these truths are self-evident, that all people are created equal? It's a metaphysical statement. It's beyond the realm of just blunt, or we would say, not gross in the sense of disgusting, but blunt, gross matter. We're not all equal. on that level. But there's a sense that we feel, no, it's right that we should treat everyone equally, you know, and that's according to Thomas Jefferson, that's a self-evident truth, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's sort of our foundation, in our Constitution, all these things. So that's when I'm speaking of a perennial tradition, that there are truths that resonate with regardless of cultures, regardless of ethnicity. There's a sense that we have that we're all equal, and we should honor and respect all living things. And the Vedas, the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, they expand not only to human beings, but all living things: animals, plants, insects, everything, all living things. Wherever there is consciousness, which is really kind of what we distinguish between inert matter and a living thing, is there's consciousness. And that also involves emotion. And literally the word emotion, what moves us? If a person is emotionally shut down, sometimes, you're emotionally unavailable. It's true, like due to trauma, sometimes coping mechanisms, you just shut down. You don't want to experience pain, so you just shut down emotionally. And it's very unfortunate. I experienced that in my own life significantly, and my emotional maturity was really tweaked. When I was a child, I was sexually abused, and it completely, like, you can't process as a child when your sort of venerable adults, teachers, coaches, or even older siblings, older children. I remember, like, I was in third grade, the sixth graders were like a terror, like, don't go over to the sixth grade end of the school, and when we can be traumatized by authority figures, and it really emotional scars. It really damages our emotional development, our maturity. And I was listening to this Franciscan priest. He was saying whenever anyone comes to him and said, I'm really having problem trusting God, like, one of the first things asked, what was your family life like? Was there some trauma? And nowadays, I would say that that's probably one of the most universal principles, that there's a lot of trauma going on. And there's a lot of emotional upheaval. And the pandemic was like a huge trauma for many, many people on a societal level. That people, because what's the worst punishment in prison? What's the worst punishment? Solitary confinement, We become emotional, we go crazy, if we don't, we're social beings. And so, to talk about, there's a term called spiritual bypassing, where it's all about going to the afterlife. It's like, we're not really concerned with the here and now. It's all about going somewhere else. And that's very unhealthy. It's an unholistic understanding of what the perennial tradition is. The perennial tradition is that we are emotional beings, and we are by nature, we thrive on love, giving love and receiving love. Without that, you can have whatever, the greatest scene, the biggest house, the fanciest car, the most successful career, but if you don't have loving relationships, what's the point? It's an empty life. And so I would say that before we can really talk about God or transcendence, we have to really understand our connection with everybody. And that's what I brought up the redwood forest thing, is that when we look in nature, everything is connected. I was watching a documentary about Yellowstone Park, and for a while, wolves were attacking a lot of the ranchers' animals. I don't know if it was the cattle or horses or whatever, but so they kind of annihilated the wolf population. And what happened is the wolves were natural predators of these, I don't know if they're antelope or what they were, some kind of animal like that. So without the wolves, the antelope just like grew like way out of proportion, and then they were going to the waters and eating some kind of foliage or whatever that completely screwed up the ecological system. And then the fish population, everything is connected in nature. So similarly, if we want to expand that a little farther, as an axiomatic truth, I'm not saying you have to accept it, but at least hypothetically, our one definition of God is Janmadhyasya Yataha. That's Sanskrit for meaning that God is the source of everything. There's a connection, like everything is connected. And this is, from shrunken consciousness to a more expanded consciousness means to see the connection between everything, how everything is interconnected. And especially, what's the strongest connection that we have with other people? Super glue? Duct tape? Yeah. It's emotion. It's emotion, because we're emotional beings, Without emotions, we're just dead stones. So, I heard this phrase from one Franciscan. He said, God is a community. Oftentimes we look, God is it's this sort of like, I'm in a God is in a vacuum, and my relationship with God is in a vacuum. It's a community. Everything is connected. So when we see everything, now this is not to, get into some sort of pantheistic idea that everything is God. I mean, that's, some people say, the cosmos is God. To me, the cosmos is God. And it's true on one level, that, everything is about, let's take it for the sun. Take the sun. The energy of the sun sustains this universe. Anyone have a problem with that? Without the sun, the universe ain't going to happen. So the energy of the sun, when that energy of the sun comes to the earth, the plants absorb the energy of the sun, and through photosynthesis, they convert that. I don't know how it happens. I'm not a botanist, but I remember in 8th grade, I had a biology class. The sun, the plants transform, they internalize that energy somehow. So when those plants die, what happens is they go underground, and after so many thousands of years, it turns into coal. And then even more pressure, deeper, it turns into oil. So what is that oil? What is that coal? It's a transformation of that sun's energy. So we are living, our electricity, the fact that we have lights on right now, are we making the connection that everything goes back to the sun? Everything is connected to the sun. So we're expanding our consciousness. We're not seeing just the immediate cause. We're connecting the dots. Just like remember when you were kids, when they had those, I don't know what you call them, connect the dots book. It has these dots, and you kind of get like a vague, if you're looking at it, but when you actually connect the dots, you see, oh, it's whatever it is, a cat or something, So the Vedic presentation is about connecting the dots to see how everything is connected, not prematurely like getting into this thing about like I want to understand the nature of a all-powerful omniscient being. Like, no, first connect the dots, see how everything is interrelated, and see how our own lives. I looked up, found this is fascinating. Again, I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a historian, but with the internet and ChatGPT now, you can become an expert in anything. But I looked this up years ago because I was fascinated about Aristotle's idea of friendship. And, we're talking connection, relationship, seeing everything in that way. And Aristotle's view on friendship, here's a quote from Aristotle. He says, "Without friends, no one would choose to live, though he had all other good things." So Aristotle categorizes friendships in three ways. First, and they're not necessarily bad, better or worse. It's just there are different levels of friendship. And that's a problem with dualistic thinking that we have in Western culture. It's prone to dualistic thinking, either or. Sacred, profane, good, bad, legal, illegal. It's very black and white thinking, And sometimes we need to have black and white thinking. As a child, you tell a kid, don't ever go out in the street alone. That's a good instruction for a child, but it's not meant for the rest of his life. Like at that point, a child doesn't have the developed, the maturity to understand there are nuances. Okay, when you're older and you can look both right and, or how society is working, then but at certain stages, sometimes black and white thinking is, or in stressful situations, trauma, black and white thinking is, fight or flight. When there's trauma, there's a whole physiological thing that happens. Your brain releases chemicals, your pituitary gland, it stimulates the adrenal glands. There's a whole thing going on in stress. And that it's, for survival. Like you need to be, there's a tunnel vision. I was talking with I was a shuttle bus driver for the University of Arizona at one point. I picked up a student. She was a visual psychologist. And I said, what's all that about? He says, well, it's, it's kind of self-explanatory, visual, what's going on with our perception. And she said, when people are under a lot of stress, there's a phenomenon called tunnel vision. Say somebody pulls a gun on you. I had that happen to me once in Chicago. I had a man pull a gun on me. I was at a table. We were doing our Hare Krishna thing, chanting and distributing literatures, and a guy came up to me. It was a big festival. It was called the Taste of Chicago. All the restaurants come out and do this whole thing. So he was a little intoxicated, but there was this whole crowd of people around the table, and I'm talking to people, and this guy stumbles up and he pulls a gun out. He goes, "What are these books about?" And I said, "Oh, reincarnation, this and that." And he goes, "Oh yeah, how about that?" And he points a gun right at me. And everybody's like standing there like, "Ah!" And anyway, this tunnel vision, this visual psychologist said that when somebody pulls a gun on you, all you see is the gun. And when the police come and interview, like, what did the guy look like? I don't know. All I saw was the gun. Well, what do you mean? He was standing right in front of you. No, there's certain, when we're under stress, things happen that really impede or impair or change our perception of things. So why am I bringing this up? stress and anxiety, because without substantive friendships, we are under emotional distress. We need healthy friendships to. We're going to talk about, transcendence, about God. No, let's get healthy now, physically and emotionally, because without being healthy physically and emotionally, you're not going anywhere, in terms of your consciousness. So, anyways, Aristotle said, I'll end on this. Aristotle talks about friendships of utility, mutual usefulness, and he describes it like people derive some benefit from one another, like a business deal. You have a friendship, you're in it because you've got some self-interest. There's some mutually beneficial relationship. And it's not necessarily bad, it's not a very substantive relationship. And it's temporary, it lasts only as long as the business deal or whatever. So it's a lower form of friendship. It's not based on character, it's based on I'm getting something out of this. And then the second category is friendships of pleasure. Relationships that are shared enjoyment or attraction. These are especially prevalent in younger people. Like, you like to go to parties together. Let's go to the concert. I'm into tennis. Let's play tennis. And you're drawn to one another. There's some mutual benefit. And again, they're not bad. It's just they're not substantive, because our tastes change. Music tastes change, sports change, your body changes, and you can't do things you used to do. So if our relationships are based on some mutual shared interest, yeah, there's some. Again, it's not wrong. It's just it's not what we really need to be emotionally healthy. We need the final friendship is friendships of virtue, where there's a mutual appreciation of each other's character and beauty. It's not about what am I getting out of it. It's like, I genuinely appreciate and respect this person for who they are, not for what I'm getting, And without developing, this is called Brahmabhuta in Sanskrit, that until we start to recognize the inherent goodness in everyone, Jefferson's, self-evident truth that all people are created, all people are fundamentally good. But when when our consciousness is shrunken, we can be not exhibiting our best behavior. Talk about our lower self and our higher self. It's when we expand our consciousness, when we see connection everywhere, then it's a virtue. When we start to honor and respect all living things, and not just living things, but inanimate things, because we see everything is connected. There's an interrelationship with everything, that nature is divine, that everything, there's a verse in one Upanishad, which is a very famous section of the Vedic literatures. It says, Ishavasyam idam sarvam yatkincha jagatam jagat. Everything animate or inanimate is ultimately coming from God. There's a divine connection with everything. So to trash the planet is, right now there's this ecological crisis that's, it's one of the big things now in polarization, climate, crisis. These are the very pressing concerns of humanity. And if, as a spiritual community or practitioner, if we are not addressing these things, we do have something to say about these things. And if we're just kind of like this French professor, I was in Detroit once, this was back in 1980s, he was traveling, or he was studying the Hare Krishna, movement. He was like, I don't know exactly what his field was, so probably something around sociology or something. So he was traveling around visiting all the Hare Krishna temples, And his English wasn't great, but I was talking to him, and he goes, I said, so what's your experience? You've traveled all around the world visiting these different communities. What's your experience? And he says, I see, poor French, what do you call it? Imitation? No, impression. I see everywhere I go, Hare Krishna people, very nice, but I think a little head in the clouds. So there's one of my mentors, he said, just like if you're in a dark cave, and you know how your vision adjusts to, if it's dark, you kind of, I mean, if there's no light at all, but if there's very dim light, your vision kind of adjusts, But if you step outside into bright light, or like in the morning when you wake up, if somebody turns on a bright light, it's like, So sometimes people take up, especially people who have like a conversion experience, they weren't brought up in a particular tradition, and they convert. It's almost like deer in the headlights. They're like, I see the light now, but they become a little like almost dysfunctional. It's like, hello, earth to whatever. And we did that a lot. I mean, I'm 66, and I joined the Hare Krishna movement when I was 20 years old. And we were an unusual bunch of folks, I must say. Sincere, but as the French professor said, a little head in the clouds, not so grounded. So I think I've probably fluffed it out enough. Does anyone have a comment or a question on anything that I've brought up?
It's interesting that you said about English being so binary, and it really lends to technological thinking, right and wrong, black and white. I've heard that a lot by Indians, Russians, and I think Chinese. So I wonder, have you studied Sanskrit, or do you have any idea of like what the alternative is, like those languages that really can express kind of ethereal, metaphysical, emotional things better than English?
Well, thank you. It's a good question. Some spiritual folks, they talk about like, it's all beyond words. Words are just material constructs, and we're talking about things, metaphysical things. You can't even use words, And you could say on one hand you could make an argument in that, that real spirituality is experiential. It's not, and there's an expression, the longest distance in the universe is the distance between your head and your heart. We are, I put the mirror up, we're caught in our heads a lot. Western culture tends to be really stuck in their heads, and I think the language expresses that, that we're, and then again, this dualistic thinking. And in Catholicism, they call it unitive consciousness. We say, Buddhism says the non-dual mind, where we see both and rather than either or. It's a more holistic, and I think the language reflects that, like you're saying, these other, and nuance too. Sanskrit, the Sanskrit language is very, very nuanced. They have verbal roots, and then there are different stems, like you add different suffixes or prefixes, and it's a very organic language, and many words share the same verbal roots, but there's shades of nuances that sometimes there's not an equivalent English word.
Yeah. Same thing with Arabic. I think when everything was translated in Greek, a lot of it got lost. That's just.
But main thing is our consciousness. It's not so much the language we use, because the sound vibration coming out of us, it's really carrying our consciousness. And we may be stimulated by someone's, we want to try to speak rationally and, reasonably, intelligently. But But the main thing is our consciousness. What do you feel? Because someone could be speaking very rationally, but they could be like very condescending. That's what you feel. It's like, this guy's a jerk. He thinks he knows, he thinks he's better than everybody because he's got a bunch of book knowledge, But if we don't have compassion, if we don't have kindness, if we don't have respect, who cares what titles you have, on the end of your name? That's not knowledge. Knowledge is not just academic. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes knowledge as a disposition of character. The real point of spirituality is that there's that transformation of our heart. We're going from me to we. It's not about me. If we bring in self-centeredness and we decorate it with religious paraphernalia, it's just selfishness. You can call yourself whatever you want. But if our consciousness is shrunken like that, it can be one of the most destructive things. Religion can be a terrible thing. When self-centeredness is garbed in religious, because now I got the authority of God behind me, in my selfishness. And I use all the high virtues and, moral things as a measure, as a metric to look at everybody and define them, sinners, saved, and we're part of the saved group, we're superior, and that's when religion gets really ugly. And historically, no excuses, but you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you were cheated, if somebody passed you counterfeit $100 bill, it doesn't mean there's not real money. It's unfortunate you got cheated. So the fact that there's materialism in the name of religion doesn't mean there's no genuine spiritual reality. It's just we become traumatized. I mean, religious trauma is a huge thing. I mean, there's so many people, like they say, I'm a recovering Catholic, Not to pick on the Catholics. I live next door to a cathedral, a Catholic cathedral, and I go there regularly to pray. It's not my, whatever, Eastern tradition, but I'm trying to look at it. There's a perennial tradition. Where is the connection between these various perspectives on God? And why there's apparent contradictions, but that's part of being a more mature person, is to be able to balance and reconcile apparent contradictions. But black and white thinking, you can't do that. It's like, no, it's either we're right and you're wrong. Can't we both be right? Even though we have superficial, there are differences. That's not just to paint a, whitewash everything, it's all one. There are distinctions, but is there an underlying truth in all wisdom traditions, spiritual traditions, religions? Can we honor other people's perspectives, or is our perspective the only way? And that's this whole polarization thing that's going on, is that people can't even talk to one another anymore. It's like, oh my God, my brother, he won't even have anything to do with the rest of our family. He's just like, he went off the charts. He just, I'm not going to Thanksgiving because, they're going to bring up, politics, It's like, come on, we got a family here. Like, we got to support one another. Do you think that's really going to matter when you're, aging and on your deathbed, what politics you, subscribe to? Is that really the issue? I think people are just traumatized, and they're hurt emotionally, and if we're not a part of the solution, we're part of the problem. You say, "Oh, I'm just not going to deal with it." No, we need to. Who said the Dalai Lama? He said, "My religion is kindness." just try to be a kind person. I mean, that's a huge thing. Like, and I've just been practicing like waving to people, when I'm out walking. It's just like, and I'm just like, I want to acknowledge people. Like, people are starving for acknowledgement. This isolation, there's an epidemic of loneliness, especially in America. I mean, psychologists, people are so lonely, There's no emotional connection, And that's what genuine spirituality offers, is like, get healthy emotionally and see the interconnectedness of all living things, Then we can talk about God. First, see how everyone is sacred and honor and respect all living things, regardless of our perspectives, there's a story of the elephant, one guy's grabbing the trunk, and they're blind men. One guy's grabbing, the elephant is like a trunk, or like a snake, and then the blind man is grabbing the leg. Elephants are like pillars, I can't remember the other one. I mean, the idea, but you could see that, from different perspectives, So expanding our consciousness, zooming out, and having, being broad-minded. The word Mahatma, or Mahatma Gandhi, but Mahatma, Atma means the self or the soul, and Mahat means great or broad-minded. A Mahatma, a spiritual person, is supposed to be broad-minded. So we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater because there are materialistic people in the guise of religion. We can't say, religion's all bogus. That's like kindergarten religion. We're the only way. Our way is the best way. Everybody else is, Anything else? It's probably about time to wrap it up, huh?
You want to explain what we're doing next? We're actually going to have the Damodar ask.
Oh, okay. Part of our, seeing this interconnectedness of all things, that God is the source of everything, is offering back these different articles in this ceremony, this ritual called arati. And the different articles, the incense represents the earth. Aroma comes from the earth. Fire, the lamp, self-explanatory, fire, the element of fire. Water, and we're offering back all these articles where, it's sort of like reconnecting it back to the source. So that's what the ritual represents, offering all these material elements back to its source. And then the circling, the forms, it's sort of like putting God in the center. We're putting a circle around. God is in the center. So that's a real brief explanation. There's a lot. I mean, it's not something you can like digest in 30 minutes. It's a whole. I've been studying this for almost 50 years, and I'm just starting to get a handle on it. So.
Thank you.
And don't feel bad about I had my earplugs with me, It's loud. If you need to step out, fine. I got earplugs.
It's a small space, so
Yeah.
small.
Other than one note, a humorous note. I brought my sister out. We had a big festival in Los Angeles called Rath Yatra. It's a big parade where we have hundreds of thousands of people, and it's all these enthusiastic Hare Krishna people jumping up and down, dancing and everything. And I brought my sister, and the chanting, the kirtan, came to sort of a feverish pitch, and the devotees were dancing and shaking, and my sister turns to me and says, "When did they bring out the human sacrifice?" It's like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom or something. So, it's a very different culture, and I appreciate that you've come and, tried to understand a little more about what makes us tick here. Hare Krishna.